Corporate Finance Excel Practice Problem. In this presentation, we're going to work a practice problem in Excel related to the Economic Ordering Quantity, EOQ. This will be problem 1 of 2 of a similar nature, both of them focusing in on the Economic Ordering Quantity. Get ready, it's time to take your chance with Corporate Finance. Here we are in Excel. We have our information on the left-hand side. We're going to put that into the blue area into the worksheet on the right-hand side. Notice that we have 2 tabs down below. You may have 4 tabs on your worksheet, 2 with the answer to them, 2 with the practice worksheets. We only have the practice worksheets here as we will work through them. If I go to practice 2, the practice 2 tab, we have a similar layout, different numbers. We'll work through this 2 times. Going back to the first tab, we will be calculating the Economic Ordering Quantity, or the EOQ. The EOQ useful formula can be a little bit complex to look at. It's a little more difficult of a formula just simply to memorize, but you want to be able to have it to be able to look up or memorize it if you need to memorize it. Once you kind of break it down, it makes sense. So let's try to analyze this and break it down so that it will then make sense. We have our formula on the right-hand side. What we're looking for is the economic ordering quantity, or in other words, the ideal ordering size that will be balancing out these 2 factors that we will discuss in a second to have the optimal ordering size. Now, when you're thinking about the order then, you want to have the optimal ordering size, which could also give you the number or the optimal number of orders that you want over a certain time period, over say a year. So let's break that down a little bit further. Why would that be? Why would you need this? Note that when we think about ordering inventory, we've done a good job, and we always think about the number of units that we would want in order to match that up against the sales that we think we're going to have. So we're talking about a year's time period. We're trying to think about how many units that we're going to need at any given time in order to match the sales level that are going to be necessary during that time period. That's one thing to consider into our calculations on what order or how many units that we want to order. But there's also another factor that we want to take into consideration, and that's going to be the fact that it costs money in order to place orders. So in other words, if I was to place the more orders that I place, it's going to be costing money in order to place the orders. You would think that that would be insignificant, because if you think about like your normal ordering process, if you're going to order something online on like Amazon or something, it doesn't take you too much time to do it. But in a business, it's going to take more time to do that. It's a bureaucracy. There's going to be checks and balances. You're going to have to go through the approval process for the ordering, and the whole process of ordering is going to cost some money in just the process of doing the order, which will cost in salary and time. So we want to basically estimate what that cost will be, because that's going to be a factor. That should be a factor as well. So we've got the factor of simply meeting the amount of demand that's going to be throughout the year, but we also want to consider this cost with making the orders. Now, if you were to consider this cost in and of itself, how much does it cost just to make the order? Note that, again, you might say that's a small number, but if you do that over and over again, it starts to become significant. So we want to estimate that. It's not an easy thing to estimate. There might be some industry standards that you can use to help to estimate what that number typically is, from people that have, spent a lot of time, thinking about the bureaucratic process of placing the order and how much that will take. But it's going to differ from company to company, and it would be best to, customize how much you think it's going to cost to pick up each order and then do this type of calculation. Now, once you have it, you would say, okay, well, if I want to maximize my cost of ordering, then it costs me $4 every time I make an order, and I know I need 40,000 units for the entire year. Why don't I just order 40,000 units one time, and that'll only cost me $4, right? Because if I ordered 20,000 2 times, it would cost me $8, right? And so on and so forth. So if I wanted to maximize the cost of ordering, I would just simply order bulk. I would order as much as I can at the beginning. So that's one factor, but we have to balance that against the other factor that's directly related to the size of the orders that we have, and that's going to be the cost of us holding on to the inventory. So that's going to be the other side. Now, again, this is going to change from industry to industry. There might be some industry standards that will be, people that have spent a lot of time, breaking down the cost of holding on to inventory, but it will once again change from industry to industry. So you'd want to get what the industry standard is, or the process of them, figuring that number out in practice, and then actually go through the process of figuring it out in your own practice, because they will differ from company to company, even though you may be in the same industry. But the idea here, of course, is holding on to the inventory has a cost, And like I said, it could differ because there could be spoilage in some industry. There could be, that theft more likely in some industries, and just the cost of warehousing certain goods and whatnot could be higher or lower. So you're going to have to figure that out from industry to industry, and it's going to include some kind of estimates in it. But we wanted to give our best estimate to get the carrying cost per unit. So we're trying to break this down to a per unit type of number. Notice this number up top is per order. Obviously the $4, we're saying that costs you $4 every time you make an order, because it's the bureaucratic process of placing the order, the time and salary related to that, and other costs related to that. With regards to the carrying cost per unit, you're talking about, we're trying to break this down to the cost per unit that we're going to be holding over the time frame, which we're going to say is a year in this case. So we want to be balancing. We need to balance these two things. These directly kind of balance out on each other to get to the ideal order size, to get to the optimal number of units that we want to be ordering at one point in time. Once we have the ideal order size, then we can think about the how many orders we will need over the year, and then we can use that to kind of line up and match up with what we think our projected sales will be over the year, and balance these two factors out to come up to our optimal strategy of what we think we should do. So our formula over here for the economic ordering quantity is going to be the square root of 2 times D times S divided by H. So 2 is just going to be just 2. And then we're going to take D, which is going to be the annual demand, or the units the demand we think we're going to sell in units, times S, and that's going to be the cost per order. So that's going to be our ordering cost per order, $4. Every time we make an order, it costs us so much to make the order. That's usually a fairly small cost, but significant over many orders, divided by H, which is going to be the holding cost. That's the cost of us holding on to one individual unit. Now note that the holding cost oftentimes will be calculated as a function of the cost per unit. So you might see the cost, you might see the cost per unit and say the holding cost should be some percentage of whatever the cost, the purchase price that we have to buy for the unit, and you could take a percentage of that. In our problem, we're just given, or you can also calculate whatever you think the carrying cost per unit would be directly. All right, so let's plug this in. We're going to be plugging this into like our tax kind of worksheet format. Remember that the more complex you have a formula, when you have a complex formula, and as the formulas get more complex, it's useful to plug them into an Excel worksheet, and it's useful to do so in a way that's going to be transparent, so you can analyze each component of the worksheet. So, and also if you do that enough times, you'll start to kind of just visualize things in terms of an Excel worksheet, and you might see it that way more clearly than you would algebraically. So clearly you can plug this in algebraically. That works fine. It might be helpful to visualize when you break them out into this worksheet and see them in terms of a table format, breaking things out into a table. And in practice, it's really useful to break things out into a table, because once you do that, if you break it out into a table, you can then change these variables on the left-hand side and think about, different scenarios based on different variables on the left. So it's really useful to do that. You can't really, obviously if you're doing a book problem, you want to kind of think of the algebra, plug it into the algebraic equation. But even if you're doing a book problem and a test and you have to memorize this, you may find that you start to memorize better, if you start to use a worksheet, because you use Excel a lot, and your mind will just basically see, a vertical format. I'm not sure. I'm not saying that's better or worse for the mind to be doing that all the time, but it is really useful to work in Excel. And it's useful to break this information out. So when you take a formula like this and make an Excel worksheet out of it, I would recommend saying, okay, there's a numerator and a denominator. I want to make any subcategories in the numerator and denominator in the first column. And then I want the end result, the numerator or denominator, to ultimately be in the far right column. Then divide that out. Then I'm going to take the square root of it. All right, so I'm going to say, okay, let's start with the numerator. Now, I'm not going to start with the 2 here. I'm going to start with the D times the S, and then we'll tack on the 2. So I'm going to say the D times the S is going to be the units that we're going to sell. So I'm going to say the projected units that we're going to sell, that's going to be equal to the 40,000. We're then going to say that the ordering cost per unit, which is S here, so the ordering cost per unit, I'm going to say that's equal to 4. Now, then I could just multiply times 2. I like to have a subtotal. I'm going to multiply these two together just like I was doing it in the calculator. If I did it in a calculator, I'd get a subtotal. So I'm going to say, let's put an underline here. home tab font group. I don't know what to name this because it's just part of the numerator. You know, we could you know, come up with a name, but I'm not going to spend time with that. I'm just going to say subtotal here is going to be equal to the 40,000 times the 4. And then I'm going to multiply that times 2. I'm not going to call it a name or anything because it just says 2 like in the formula. So I'm going to go to the home tab font group. We're going to underline that. And then I'll multiply that out. That's going to give me the numerator. So I'm going to put that on the right-hand side. I want the numerator to be on its own column now, the numerator and denominator out there. So I'm going to say this is going to be the 160,000 times, I said times, I might have said divide before, but times 2. And then that's going to be another subtotal. I might just call it the numerator, right? You know, it's the numerator. And then I'm going to say the denominator is just h. So that's going to, I can put that right on the bottom as is. So I'm going to say the carrying cost per unit is simply what it is. I don't need to do any subcalculation. I do need to add a decimal, so I'm going to go to the home tab, numbers, I'll add a couple decimals. All right, and then we'll divide that out. So I'm going to divide this out, and that's going to be another subtotal because we still have to take the square root of it. So I'm going to take the numerator divided by the denominator, and I'll put the home tab font group underlined here. That's the 200,000. Now I'm going to take the square root, and I'm going to label it here. I could say square root and then, you know, economic order and quantity, but the bottom line is the economic order and quantity. That's the name of the worksheet. So I'm just going to take the square root of the 200,000. There's a formula in Excel to do that. It's called equals SQRT, square root. That's what it stands for, clearly, square root, SQRT. So I'm going to double click on SQRT. And then you get the brackets, and I'm going to click on the 200,000. So SQRT brackets F8. You could close up the brackets. Don't really need to. It'll do that for you. I'm just going to hit enter. And there's the 447. I'm going to go to the home tab. Numbers, I'm going to add a couple decimals. Let's put an underline on the 200,000 home tab, font group, and underline. So if we were to consider these two factors, the balancing of the 4 and the 1.6, and again, we're making assumptions that these are linear, you know, that this cost is the same, and that, you know, over time it's a linear cost, and that this is a linear cost. It doesn't, you know, we're talking about, so there's assumptions that we're making, obviously, in this, but you can see it's a nice calculation to give us that average, a number of units that we want to order. So we want to order then about 447.21. Obviously, we can't order 0.21, but about 447 units that we want to order. So then we can think, well, how many units would we then be ordering for the entire year if I'm going to order 447.21 each time, and I need to order 40,000 over the entire year? Well, then we're going to say, all right, well, the projected units that we need for like the entire year is 40,000, and we're going to be then dividing that times our economic ordering quantity, which is the amount of orders that we make, you know, each time, which is this 447.21 about. I'm going to add a couple decimals. Now, note rounding will be involved here because we're not going to actually order, you know, 0.21 units. They would confuse people. And so we're going to then underline this home tab font group and underline it. And then if I take that 40,000 divided by the 44721, we get about the 89 units. Let's go to our quantity home tab numbers. We can add a few decimals. Again, it's rounded, so about 89 orders, right? And that's going to give us our number of orders. So you can see this is a nice little calculation for us to balance these two costs out, to take that into consideration. That would then mean that we would, if we were to linearly order this, meaning, for example, if we had sales for the entire year that are like the same, not a seasonal business, then we can just say, well, then let's just balance these two out, and we can get to our optimal ordering quantity, you know, basically balancing these two factors out. Now, if we have a seasonal business, then of course we might want to calculate this optimal ordering quantity, and then we have to think a little bit more on how we're going to balance that against our strategy with relation to the fact that we're going to have more of these 40,000 units sold some part of the year than other parts of the year. Do we want to be holding on to inventory for more time and less time and whatnot? So it gets to be a more complex strategy in that case. But notice that this clearly would be a factor that we want to be taking into consideration in our plan. So then we can calculate also the average inventory. So if I took the economic ordering quantity, which is going to be the 447.21, and multiplied it times 2, then we're going to say the 447 times 2. Let's add some decimals here. I'm going to hold down Control and click these two non-adjacent cells, go to the Home tab, and add a few decimals in the numbers group, and that would give us our average inventory. And so let's put an underline here, Home tab, font group, and underline. So there we have it. Let's try it again. Let's do it again. Useful calculation. So let's do this one again. Second tab. Same kind of process, different types of numbers here. We're going to say now that we have the projected sales for the entire, we're going to say year, 11,500 in units. That's the units that we need for the entire period. In this case, we're going to say a year. The ordering cost per unit costs us $14. That's the cost of us ordering each individual unit. So if I was to order then the whole 11,500 units one time with one order, it would only cost me $14. If I divide it by 2 and have 2 orders for the entire year, it would cost me $28, and so on and so forth. To optimize this number, we can then order the entire 11,500 units we need for the entire year one time, one giant bulk order. That would be great. But we can't do that because we have to balance it out against the fact that we then would have to pay for the cost of us holding on to the inventory until we sell it. And that's going to be what we're going to try to break down in this cost of the carrying cost per unit. So the carrying cost per unit is going to be the cost of us, holding on to one individual unit of inventory. We're going to try to break that cost down to one individual unit of inventory for the time period that we're talking about. In this case, we're going to say a year. If we have this information, we can balance these two out then and think about what the optimal order quantity would be. And once we have the optimal order quantity, we can then easily figure out the number of orders that we would want optimally to balance these two out over the time period, over, in this case, then the year, and then use that to factor into our strategy as to how many units we want to be purchasing. If we have, like a fixed sales for the entire year, or if we have a seasonal business, there's another factor that we would want to be taken into consideration. All right, formula, square root 2 times D, which is going to be the annual demand, or the units that we expect to sell, times S, which is the cost per unit, the ordering cost per unit, divided by H, which is the holding cost, the cost of us holding on to the inventory, to carry the inventory, one unit over a certain time period. Oftentimes this H will be characterized as a percentage of the sales cost. It's not in this case, but you might see it in that format as well. Remember that these two numbers are difficult, to come by. We have to figure those out. We have to estimate those. We could use industry standards, but typically you want to get the format of how it would be done in practice, and then apply the format of how to get to that number, because those numbers will probably differ in every company, even if it's the same industry. All right, so then we're going to calculate this. We're going to have the projected unit sales. So once again, I'm going to break this formula down. I want to have the numerator and denominator on the outer side here. Then take the difference, take the division problem, and then we'll take the square root. That's how I would practice breaking these out into like a worksheet. I think it's really worthwhile to do that, even if you're just learning this for a test practicing question, right? Because it's easy to think about this vertically. So we're going to say, all right, we want to take then the projected unit sales. Projected unit sales, I'm going to put that in the inner column. This is D. So notice I'm not starting with 2. I want to start with D times S, which is going to be, S is going to be the cost per unit, or the 14. So that's going to be the ordering cost per order. And that's going to be equal to the 14. Now I could multiply this times 2, but I like to take the subtotals, D times S, because that's what would happen basically in a calculator. I think and it could give us that more information. So I'm going to go Home tab, font, underline. I'm going to call this a subtotal, and that's going to be equal to the 11.5 times the 14. Then I'm going to multiply it times 2. That's going to be the other item in the numerator. And Home tab, font group, underline. And that's going to give us, I'm going to call it a subtotal. We could call it the numerator. Because it's the numerator, I'm going to put it on the outer column. This is going to be equal to the 161 times the 2. There's our numerator. The denominator only has one number in it, so I'm simply going to put that into the outer column, right off the bat. And that's going to be the carrying cost, H, which is the carrying cost per unit, This will be equal to the $1.80. So I'm going to go back over here, add some decimals, home tab, numbers, add a few decimals, 180. I'm going to put an underline under it, home tab, font group, and underline. And that's going to give us then, I'm going to call it another subtotal because we still have to take the square root. So I'm going to be taking this equals the 322,000, the numerator divided by the 1.8 or denominator. And then we need to take the square root, which I'm just going to call square root so that we can see the calculation, knowing that this will end up in the bottom line being the economic ordering quantity. So this is going to be equal to the SQRT, not a function we use all the time here in Excel, but very useful function to have. You can take the square root with function SQRT brackets F8. There we have it. I'm going to add a couple decimals just in case. Home tab, font group, add a couple decimals. So it looks like it's at the 422.95. Now, obviously, we would be rounding to 423 units that we would then be purchasing. So we're going to say to balance these two out, the optimal size quantity that we would be purchasing, given the assumptions of the calculation, given a linear kind of holding on to cost and the ordering cost and whatnot, would be $423 about. I'm going to put an underline here, home tab, font group, underline. If we know that, then how many orders would we make of 423 about units? Well, for that, we can just simply take the total units that we're going to need, which is the total units we're saying for the period, which in this case we're going to say for the year, 11,500, and then we want to divide that by what we just calculated, our economic ordering quantity, which we just said was this 422.95 about, 423 about, home tab, number, add a few decimals, underline, home tab, font group, and underline. That's going to give us then the number of orders. Number of orders. So in other words, obviously, if we want to order 11,500 on the year, because that's how many units we need, and we're going to order a quantity of 423 about each time, then that means 11,500 divided by that. It's going to give us 27 orders about. Again, I'm going to add some decimals, home tab, number, add decimals, because nothing's a perfect world. It's going to be rounded, so we're going to order about 27 times. So the average inventory, we can calculate then the average inventory. The average inventory we would calculate as the economic ordering quantity, which is going to be that 422.95. Let's add some decimals. Home tab, numbers, we're going to add a few decimals here. We're then going to just multiply that times 2, and that's going to give us our average inventory. Average inventory is going to be the 422.95 times, divided by 2. Let's put an underline here. Home tab, font group, underline, add some decimals, home tab, numbers, add a few decimals here. Now, given these assumptions, we can go down and say, well, then what would the total cost to order and carry inventory be under this assumption? What is actually the cost? We've optimized the number to lower the cost. So now we can start to think about what would the cost then be, and that might help us to think about whether this is significant. Is lowering this, is maximizing this, worthwhile, given the significance of these costs? We can start to, think about. So we can say, all right, well, what would the ordering costs be given these numbers? And we can say then the ordering cost colon, we're going to say the number of orders that we're going to have is going to be about this 27. I'm going to put this on the inner side, about the 2719. I'm going to add some decimals, home tab, font group, add a few decimals, and then we're going to have the number of orders and then the ordering costs per order, which is going to be equal to that 14. And that means that the cost then is going to be equal to the 2719 times the 14, or the 381. And we're going to say this is going to be our ordering cost. Let's format that. I'm going to select these items. Home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. This one, home tab, alignment, increase the indenting. Then we have the carrying cost. So we're going to say carrying cost. We have the average inventory that we calculated up top, the average inventory. This is obviously an average here, so we're going to say this is going to be the 211.48. Let's add some decimals. Home tab, numbers, add a few decimals. We're going to multiply that times the carrying cost, which is the 1.8, $1.80. Home tab, numbers, add a few decimals. Let's put an underline. Home tab, font group, underline. Let's underline this one. Home tab, font group, and underline. Multiplying this out, this is going to be this number times this number, and then we'll put an underline here. Home tab, font group, and underline. This is going to be the carrying cost. So carrying cost. Let's highlight these three. Home tab, alignment, increase, indenting. This one. Home tab, alignment, increase, indenting. This is going to give us the total cost to order and carry inventory. So this will be equal to the sum of these two items. That's going to give us the $761.